Imagine this. You're taught that empires collapse because of war, economic downfall, or foreign invasion. That it's always some great external blow that brings giants to their knees. But what if I told you that's a distraction? That the real decay begins from within, when the wise are silenced and the idiots are celebrated, when intelligence becomes a threat and mediocrity gets promoted, when a system once built by visionaries ends up rewarding those who don't think, don't question, and don't care as long as they obey. This isn't some fringe theory. It's not a conspiracy whispered in dark corners. It's a pattern you'll find hiding in plain sight across every dying empire in history. From ancient Rome to modern America, the symptoms are always the same. The erosion of truth, the elevation of spectacle, and the glorification of stupidity. The collapse doesn't start with an enemy at the gates. It starts when the empire itself begins to see intelligence as dangerous and compliance as virtue. Think about it. The last stage of a dying system isn't marked by bold vision or courageous leadership. It's marked by noise, by distraction, by people rising to power not because they have insight, but because they know how to flatter, how to echo, how to sell illusions. The people who speak uncomfortable truths are pushed to the margins, and in their place, the court jesters take the throne. Loud, proud, empty. Does that sound familiar? Have you ever looked around and wondered, how did this person get that position? How did stupidity become a badge of honor? Why are people who ask real questions being treated like threats? If you felt like you're the only sane one in the room, like you're surrounded by a world that claps louder for the clown than for the thinker, you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're awake in a system that rewards sleepwalkers. History doesn't just rhyme. It repeats with eerie precision. In ancient Rome, the Senate once debated matters of life and death. But in its final days, the masses were fed bread and circus while the empire burned. Those who dared to warn were mocked. Those who entertained were rewarded. In Nazi Germany, the voices of wisdom and dissent were crushed early. What remained were the loudest cheerleaders, those too blind to see reality and too proud to admit it. And today, scroll your screen, turn on your TV. The more ridiculous, the more rewarded. The more mindless, the more promoted. You see, an empire in decline doesn't just tolerate idiocy, it incentivizes it. It turns stupidity into strategy. Why? You see, an empire in decline doesn't just tolerate idiocy, it incentivizes it. It turns stupidity into strategy. Why? They won't clap on cue, and so slowly but surely, they're pushed out. While the fools, obedient, cheerful, malleable, are welcomed in. This is not a glitch. It's the final stage of control. When intelligence is rebranded as rebellion, when depth is dismissed as negativity, when excellence is replaced by performance. And the result? A culture where it's better to look confident than to be competent. Where truth offends, but ignorance is embraced. Where empires applaud the fools and punish the thinkers. So if you've been feeling like a man out of place, like someone trying to speak logic in a room full of slogans, this message is for you. You're not broken. You're not bitter. You're one of the few who still sees clearly in a world that's been trained to look away. And in this video, we're going to peel back the layers, not just to expose the pattern of collapse, but to understand why this keeps happening, who benefits from it, and how you can stay sharp, grounded, and free in a time when the world celebrates the mindless. Because if we don't learn from the past, we don't just repeat it, we live inside its slow-motion tragedy. So how does this happen? How does an empire go from cultivating brilliance to rewarding blind obedience? The answer lies in what I call the inverse filter, a quiet shift in priorities that changes the very nature of power itself. In the early stages of any empire, intelligence is fuel. Critical thinking, innovation, and individual excellence are not just welcomed, they're necessary for survival. Empires aren't built by yes-men. They rise on the backs of visionaries, engineers, artists, philosophers, people who dared to challenge the status quo and push beyond the known. In times of expansion, uncertainty, and competition, original thinking is a matter of life or death. The system thrives on brilliance. It seeks it out, rewards it, protects it. But then comes the turning point. The empire grows, the borders stabilize. The threats become more internal than external. Power consolidates, and with it comes fear, not of enemies, but of dissent. The people at the top are no longer builders. They are maintainers, gatekeepers. Their priority shifts from creation to control. And here's where the filter flips. Intelligence becomes inconvenient. Smart people ask questions. They challenge norms. They don't just follow rules, they demand reasons. That makes them dangerous. You can't govern a decaying empire with thinkers. You need loyalists. People who don't look too closely, don't rock the boat, and will repeat what they're told with a smile. So the system begins to rewire itself. Not overtly. No one stands up and declares, "From now on, we punish thinking." No, it happens subtly, quietly. Promotions go to the agreeable. Praise goes to the predictable. Compliance is confused with competence. And before you know it, the people rising through the ranks are not the most capable, but the most controllable. This is the inverse filter. The natural intelligence, curiosity, and strength that once built the empire now become liabilities. They threaten the hierarchy, so they're pushed out, or worse, taught to suppress themselves in exchange for comfort. Meanwhile, the yes-men, the empty suits and smiling fools, are rewarded, promoted, and paraded as examples of success. It's not that the empire starts wanting stupidity. It's that the structure begins to select for it. Like a broken algorithm, the system feeds itself the safest data until all that's left are echoes of loyalty, echoes of slogans, echoes of obedience. And what's the cost of that? Everything. Innovation dies, truth gets buried, integrity is replaced with performance. And when the real challenges come, when reality finally breaks through the illusions, there's no one left with the courage or clarity to respond. The empire, once built by wisdom, collapses under the weight of its own stupidity. It's not a sudden fall. It's a slow decay, a hollowing out from the inside. And by the time the structure collapses, most people don't even know what went wrong. It's not a sudden fall. It's a slow decay, a hollowing out from the inside. And by the time the structure collapses, most people don't even know what went wrong. Not because the system is irrational, but because it has evolved to protect itself from truth. It no longer seeks what's real. It seeks what's easy to manage. And if you've ever felt punished for thinking too deeply, or sidelined because you wouldn't play along, you've already seen this filter in action. But this isn't just about history. In the next section, we'll walk through how this exact pattern showed up in real civilizations, from the Roman Empire to the modern West. Because once you see it there, you'll never unsee it here. The inverse filter we just talked about isn't theoretical. It's historical. It's not just a concept. It's a pattern so well worn, you can trace its fingerprints through every fallen empire. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with Rome. In its prime, Rome absorbed the brilliance of the Greeks. Philosophy, science, architecture, ethics. It was a civilization that honored thinkers and builders. But in its decline, all of that was discarded for spectacle. The voice of wisdom was drowned out by the roar of the mob. The empire began feeding the people bread and circuses, literal handouts of food and violent entertainment in the Colosseum to keep them distracted while corruption festered at the core. Intellectuals were ignored or mocked. The educated were seen as out of touch, overly complicated, or even disloyal. And as long as you cheered loud enough for the blood on the sand, no one cared what you knew. Rome didn't fall in one night. It rotted from within as intelligence lost its place and idiocy was rewarded with applause. Then there's late imperial China during the collapse of the Qing Dynasty. For centuries, Chinese civilization revered scholarship. The imperial examination system was designed to elevate the brightest minds to positions of leadership. But toward the end, that meritocracy was poisoned. Corruption overtook competence. Loyalists, eunuchs, and sycophants took center stage, not because they were wise, but because they said what the emperor wanted to hear. Confucian scholars who once guided the moral compass of the empire were pushed aside, their ideas labeled outdated or dangerous. Dissent wasn't tolerated, it was punished. And when foreign powers knocked at the gates, the empire was too hollow to defend itself, rotted by decades of anti-intellectualism and internal decay. And then there's the most chilling example, Nazi Germany in its final phase. In the early years, even some sharp minds were drawn to Hitler's promises of order and national revival. But as the regime tightened its grip, anyone who questioned the narrative, any scientist, philosopher, military officer, or politician who dared to think independently, was silenced, imprisoned, or executed. What remained were the blind loyalists, the true believers, and the opportunists, people who followed orders without question. The empire descended into delusion, insisting on victory even as it crumbled. Berlin was burning, but inside the bunker, Hitler was still shuffling imaginary divisions across the map. The leadership had become a parody of itself, isolated from reality, insulated by loyalty, and terrified of truth. Across these civilizations, one thread runs through them all. The rational are treated as rebels, and the fools are praised as patriots. The thinkers become threats, the obedient become heroes, and by the time the collapse is visible to everyone, it's too late, because the people capable of turning the tide were pushed out long ago. These aren't just historical tragedies, they are warnings. Every time a society starts to mistake agreement for intelligence, when loyalty is valued over logic, when slogans drown out questions, that society is already on the path to decay. And now we have to ask the uncomfortable question: if this pattern is so clear in history, could it be happening again, right now? Could we be living through the early echoes of the same decline? In the next part, we'll turn our gaze to the present, to modern institutions, media, and culture, and see if we, too, have begun to reward the fools while silencing the minds that once built civilizations. If you think this pattern of decline is just a relic of the past, think again. The same machinery that once tore down empires is alive and well today. Only now it wears better branding. We're not watching history repeat itself in dusty textbooks. We're living inside its latest version, upgraded with algorithms, entertainment, and illusion. Let's start with education. What was once meant to ignite the mind has become a system of compliance. The modern school doesn't reward curiosity, it punishes it. Students are trained to memorize, repeat, and pass. Don't ask why, don't think differently, just stay in line, fill in the bubbles, follow the rubric. Those who challenge, who question, who deviate from the script, they're labeled difficult, disruptive, or even a problem. The system doesn't want thinkers. It wants products, predictable, obedient, test-ready products. And it doesn't stop there. Turn on the television. Scroll your feed. Look at who's famous. We've created an entire class of celebrities whose success depends not on wisdom, skill, or substance, but on noise. The louder, the dumber, the more viral, they win. Reality shows elevate dysfunction. Talk shows reward outrage. Idiocy becomes entertainment, and entertainment becomes culture. We no longer celebrate the thoughtful. We celebrate the ridiculous. Some of today's most visible public figures couldn't explain a complex idea if their lives depended on it, but they've mastered the art of being loud, confident, and marketable. That's all you need. Because in the era of content, packaging matters more than depth. And the result? A generation growing up thinking that fame is the highest form of truth. That going viral is the same as being right. That being provocative beats being intelligent. And then comes the great illusion, social media. You're told it's the ultimate expression of freedom, that anyone can speak, anyone can rise. But look closer. Who actually gets rewarded by the algorithm? It's not nuance, it's not reflection. It's simplicity, outrage, shock, and speed. Posts that stir emotion, not thought. Clips that trigger, not teach. The more impulsive you are, the more you win. Complexity is punished with low engagement. Shallow wins the race. This is where the empire's decline gets turbocharged. Because now, we're not just tolerating stupidity, we're gamifying it. We're turning it into content, monetizing it, idolizing it. The influencer isn't an expert, a thinker, a guide. They're a face, a brand, a personality that fits neatly into the algorithm's box. Loud, unthreatening, easy to follow, and easier to sell. And what does this all mean? It means we're watching the re-engineering of culture to favor the exact traits that once marked the end of empires. Obedience over originality, image over intellect, and popularity over principle. The system selects for simplicity not because it's good, but because it's easy to control. So here we are, living in a time when the historical warnings are flashing red. But we've been taught to laugh instead of listen. We scroll past the thinkers and double-tap the fools. We silence what challenges us and amplify what entertains us. And just like Rome, just like the Qing Dynasty, just like every dying empire before us, we're building our own decline, one trending soundbite at a time. In the next part, we'll explore what this means for those who still think, who still feel that quiet pull toward truth. Why is it that in a world like this, the wise often go silent and the fools are handed the mic? Stay with me. Because this isn't just about culture, it's about survival. So what happens to the thinkers? The ones who still see clearly in a world obsessed with noise? You'd imagine they'd speak louder, fight harder, push back against the stupidity clawing its way to the top. But they don't. Not always. Not anymore. Because in a society that rewards simplicity and punishes depth, intelligence isn't just ignored, it's discouraged. The more perceptive you are, the more risks you see. The more thoughtful your questions, the more threatening they sound. People who speak the truth get labeled as negative, cynical, or worse, dangerous. You're not considered insightful. You're too intense. You're not bold. You're too much. It starts small. You challenge a common belief and you're met with blank stares or eye rolls. You point out flaws in the system and suddenly you're the problem. You ask uncomfortable questions and now you're a downer, a conspiracy theorist, or just being difficult. It doesn't matter how logical you are. If your words make others uncomfortable, the system finds ways to silence you, not through force, but through exclusion. And so, slowly, something tragic happens. The intelligent begin to censor themselves, not because they're wrong, but because they're tired. Tired of the backlash, tired of explaining nuance in a world that wants headlines, tired of fighting a current that only flows toward comfort and conformity. You've probably heard the phrase, "Don't overthink it." It sounds harmless, almost friendly. But think about what it really means. It's a cultural warning, a subtle way of saying, stay shallow, stay easy, don't dig too deep, because if you do, you'll disturb the surface, and people don't like that. In a declining empire, thinking too deeply is almost an act of rebellion, because it breaks the spell, it calls out the lie, it reminds people of truths they've tried to forget, and the system can't afford that. So instead of challenging the thinker outright, it convinces them to dim their own light. This is how self-censorship begins. The wise learn to keep quiet, not because they've lost their voice, but because they've learned the cost of using it. They shrink themselves, soften their thoughts, edit their truths, until one day the silence becomes a habit. And here's the consequence. When the intelligent goes silent, stupidity becomes the dominant voice. Not because it's smarter, not because it's better, but because it's louder and easier. The fools take the stage, not because they've earned it, but because no one else is speaking. This isn't just sad, it's dangerous. Because when truth is silenced, lies become the law. When thoughtfulness disappears, the culture loses its compass. And when the wise retreat, the blind led the blind right into the fire. So if you've ever felt that hesitation, that voice in your head telling you to stay quiet, not because you're wrong, but because you're too real, you're not alone. So if you've ever felt that hesitation, that voice in your head telling you to stay quiet, not because you're wrong, but because you're too real, you're not alone. When you refuse to play dumb, when you reclaim your mind, your voice, and your courage, even if no one claps. Because the real revolution doesn't begin with shouting louder. It begins when one honest person decides not to lie anymore. Stay with me, we're almost there. If you've ever felt out of place, like you're pretending to be dumber just to get through the day, like you're shrinking your mind just to fit in, you need to hear this. You're not alone. You're not broken. You're not the problem. You're one of the few still awake in a world that's chosen to sleep. In a collapsing system, clarity looks like rebellion. Intelligence looks like arrogance. Integrity looks like defiance. And when idiocy becomes the currency of success, the wise are treated like heretics. But hear this. Your discomfort is not a curse. It's a signal, a reminder that something inside you still works, that you haven't traded your mind for approval. Don't waste your energy chasing recognition from a system that rewards the shallow, the loud, and the loyal. Don't measure your worth against a society that hands out trophies for conformity and punishes reflection. That kind of validation isn't real, it's a leash. Instead, build your own compass. Learn what matters, not because someone told you to, but because truth has weight and wisdom has depth. Read real books, think uncomfortable thoughts, create things that matter even if no one's watching. The world might not applaud you, but it needs you desperately. Because make no mistake, the empire will fall. All systems built on spectacle over substance eventually collapse. The timeline is uncertain, but the outcome never is. And when it happens, when the noise dies down and the dust settles, only one question will matter. Who kept their mind intact while the world was losing its own? You don't have to shout. You don't have to fight the flood. You just have to remain awake, fully, deeply, unapologetically awake. Because those who hold on to truth through the darkest times are the ones who carry light into what comes next. They are the seed of whatever will rise from the rubble. So now you have a choice. You can join the chorus of clowns, laughing, shouting, dancing as the empire burns. Or you can be the quiet voice of clarity, the steady hand, the one who doesn't trade soul for comfort. Ask yourself, do you want to be a pawn in the final festival of stupidity, or the one who plants something real for what comes after? The end of an empire is always noisy, but the rebirth, it begins in silence with someone, somewhere refusing to play along. Maybe that someone is you.